Gaming was never the same after the parasites that are microtransactions were introduced. This video will be looking at the history of their involvement in the industry from around 2005 to 2020. Now, microtransactions have been around in some form or another for much longer than this, but we'd be looking at arcade games and other stuff like that if we were to include them, and I wanted to keep this more modernized. So we begin our story in a time where gaming seemingly took a turn for the best. In late 2005, the Xbox 360 was released, with the PS3 dropping around a year later. These consoles erupted and took gaming to the next level by putting far more emphasis onto online play. However, what sadly came along with this were the very beginnings of what we now know and hate, microtransactions. Initially, Microsoft advertised their DLC, which is just a dated term for microtransactions, as a way for developers to make more money from their games throughout their life cycle. At first, it wasn't too obvious or intrusive. In games like Oblivion, you were able to buy additional cosmetic items for your horse in the form of armor. Even though this is a pretty minor inclusion and only set players back around $2.50 for a set, the community immediately fought back. Little did they know what the future of the gaming landscape would look like, as it wouldn't be too long before that price would only get you the lowest amount of in-game currency possible. But despite the backlash from the community, people went ahead and bought these skin packs anyway, and things started to get a little bit exciting for the game developers.
What happened? I won.
So now, armed with the knowledge that they could charge players additional money on top of the initial game purchase for things like armor sets or new maps, we started seeing the first signs of a more sinister approach from these companies in 2009. This came in the form of online passes, which made you pay to play online if you didn't buy the game firsthand. This predictably enraged the community further, as whilst it seemed pretty scummy to charge $2.50 for some pretty lackluster DLC skins, at least they were adding something different into the game that you couldn't get otherwise. As the years have gone by, online passes have slowly but surely been phased out of gaming, which may seem like a win, but unfortunately what gradually started to take their place wasn't exactly much better. 2011 saw the introduction of season passes into games like LA Noire, another new feature that players would come to hate shortly after its reveal. Cosmetic DLC and online passes were both pretty awful and should never really have found a way into the gaming industry, but at least, and hear me out here, at least they were transparent. Season passes, on the other hand, were the first real step that developers took into selling you a bunch of stuff that you really could have lived without, wrapping it up into one big bundle of mediocrity and then including one or maybe two items that actually looked desirable. When they were first introduced in LA Noire, you actually got some decent stuff, including a bunch of new missions to complete and then a couple of outfits that were really not necessary. This then grew into what season passes are in a game like Call of Duty, which are pretty much entirely made up of useless items with a couple new weapons in there that you can unlock faster by buying it. The major difference we're seeing in season passes compared to when they were first introduced is that it's no longer a one-off purchase. Before, you could buy the pass and gain access to all the new DLC that was going to be released in the future, whereas now you get all of those items for that one particular season. Then as soon as the next one rolls around, you'll be reset to level 1 of the season pass and be forced to pay the same price to do it all over again. This all seemed pretty bad at the time and certainly wasn't well received again by players. But what was about to materialize from the season pass experiment would be much, much worse. Things then took an extremely dark turn. Knowing that they could charge you a hefty fee for a bunch of stuff you didn't care about, developers started to introduce loot boxes into their games. These had been prevalent in games prior, such as EA's Ultimate Team, which began selling packs in FIFA 09, and Valve's Team Fortress 2, but they weren't really made popular until around 2012, when tons of other companies jumped on the bandwagon to charge innocent 10-year-olds bucket loads of cash with no guaranteed reward. Around this time, YouTubers also started to gain thousands of subscribers by simply doing huge loot box openings. As always, it started off fairly tame, with there being videos of people spending maybe $100 at a time, but that was a rarity. Developers would quickly clock on to the fact that players would willingly spend hundreds of their hard-earned dollars on top of the initial $60 purchase, and decided to go all in on the surprise mechanics. Essentially what this all was a legal way to allow children to gamble using their parents' credit cards. You buy a box that has a very vague description of what's inside, and 9 times out of 10 you receive utter garbage, with that one box giving you an insane reward that makes you desperate to chase that hit of dopamine again and again. Does this all sound familiar? That's because it is. If you've ever stepped inside a casino, you'll know that this is their exact tactic. So now that they'd established they can promote gambling to minors, developers started to pounce. 2 significant games would be released in 2017 that are largely considered as the peak of the loot box infestation: Shadow of War and Star Wars Battlefront 2. Not only did these 2 games hide the majority of their content behind loot boxes, Shadow of War even went as far as locking the true ending of the game behind them. In their defense, you were able to get to this through playing the game, but you'd be looking at hours and hours of tedious grinding just to do so, which was very much the same situation for Battlefront 2. The sequel to the Star Wars classic launched with some questionable new mechanics. Now, instead of having to play the game to unlock additional characters, most of the fan favourites were insanely hard to obtain for free. Alternatively, you could take advantage of the new loot box system, which would give you in-game currency to unlock your favourite characters without actually playing the game. Fans got to work and quickly did the maths, and figured out that in order to unlock all playable items, you'd need to grind the game for around 4,528 hours. Or if you didn't fancy that, pay a ridiculous $2,100. This ended up causing so much backlash that eventually EA had to remove the option of buying the loot boxes from the game altogether, and instead make them obtainable through playing only. In late 2018, companies like EA started being taken to court over their loot box systems. Belgium swiftly banned all loot boxes from video games after what can only be described as a weak defense from EA.
Well, first, we don't call them loot boxes. I think that was
whatever term you wish to apply to them. Do you consider them ethical?
So what we look at as surprise mechanics.
This then encouraged other countries to follow suit and prosecute as well. The Netherlands also decided that this was glorified gambling and began proceedings to ban loot boxes in their country. However, in an extremely shocking turnaround, the highest administrative court overturned this decision and claimed that there was no significant evidence that loot boxes, or in this case FIFA packs, were a game of chance, instead opting to describe them more as a game of skill. Around this same time of the legal disputes, we started seeing a new style of game crop up on consoles and PC, which followed more of a mobile game blueprint than before. Free-to-play games such as Fortnite and Warzone allowed companies to reach a far broader audience while surviving solely off the microtransactions from within the game. Again, they make the use of season passes, with there being around 4 seasons each year, and on top of this they have the additional purchases of character and weapon skins. With all of these factors combined, LendEDU released findings in 2018, just a year after Fortnite's initial release, that the average player was spending around $85 on the game. Now that already covers the cost of a regular game, but considering that this figure increased by 21% in 2020, Fortnite seemingly made a very wise choice in making it free to play. With aforementioned games such as Warzone and others like Valorant also using this blueprint, it seems like it's here to stay. If you liked this video and didn't hate the sound of my voice, then why not watch another?